Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Liam Moroney. I'm the Demand Generation Manager at NewsCred, and I'll be moderating the webinar for you. Your hosts today will be Micah Cohen, Director of Growth at 2020, and Liz Bedore, Content Marketing Strategist at NewsCred. Mike is currently the Director of Growth at 2020, where he leads up content marketing, digital advertising, product marketing, and product growth initiatives. Before this, Micah helped Living Social scale its user growth to more than 60 million while on the user acquisition team. Liz is a content marketing strategist at NewsCred, where she's helped enterprise brands including Blue Cross Blue Shield, IBM, Verizon, ADP, and Office Depot conceptualize, implement, and optimize their content marketing strategies. Before this, Liz was a brand marketer for technology leader Salesforce.com. And just to get some quick housekeeping tips out of the way, the webinar is set to last between 30 and 40 minutes, at the end of which we'll be answering some of your questions. If you want to ask a question, please feel free to do so at any stage during the webinar by using the text box provided, and we'll bring them all up at the end. And don't forget to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag ThinkContent and the Twitter handles @2020app and @NewsCred. So now that we've gotten the logistics out of the way, I'm delighted to turn the webinar over to Liz.
Thanks, Liam. So before we get started, just wanted to kind of explain why NewsCred and 2020 are doing this webinar together. So we've recently partnered together with 2020 which provides user-generated content that are all rights cleared. And at NewsCred, we always talk about the importance of a mix of content. And typically, when we say that, people think of licensed and original content. But a big part of that is also user-generated. And a lot of brands know that they should be using user-generated content to authentically engage their audience, but run into challenges with legal issues and things like getting rights cleared. So our new partnership is a way of us providing that need with high-quality, authentic, user-generated images, all within our Content Marketing Cloud software. So with that, I'll kick it over to Micah to get started.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for the introduction, Liam. So, yeah, as Liz mentioned, I'm the Director of Growth at 2020, and 2020 is the world's largest user-generated stock photo platform. And we care about this very deeply, this concept of using authentic photos in your content marketing efforts. So today, we really wanted to focus on a subject matter and kind of explain in a more advanced way to content marketers how to actually choose authentic photos for your projects and your blogs and anything that comes up on social media. So with that, we'll kind of dive a little deeper on how to use authentic, relevant photos to help you as a marketer grow your business a little faster. So let's dive in here. Cool. So agenda, we're going to kind of go over as a holistically why authenticity matters to your brand. What are the components of what makes an authentic photo? Understand a little bit of the difficult terms, how to search for authentic photos, and then lastly, Liz will be kind of diving deep on what companies today are doing this well and kind of why. So let's dive into those. So we have found that authenticity is actually the most important component of doing really effective marketing here at 2020 and in the past. And we know that this is vital for brands these days. I'm sure everyone is aware of this, but we wanted to kind of dive deep on what are the components of what matters in this situation and why it matters. So here's a study that we found where we actually found that honesty and integrity were actually more important to millennials than even brand recognition. So when you're trying to assess how to do marketing really effectively digitally, understanding those components matters a lot. Another really interesting study that we found was done by Cornell University. So they did a study where they basically put the same exact menu with the exact same food in front of patrons' plates. And essentially, the only difference that they put was a matter of how they named the actual menu item. So instead of chili, they named it Grandma's Chili to be more culturally influenced, more relevant to the geography, and things like traditional Cajun beans. They actually found that patrons ordered them more and actually said that that food tasted better, even though it was the exact same food. And this is an interesting case where even perceived authenticity can affect the bottom line of a company. These days, billions of photos are shared on Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, everything you can imagine. This is a major shift in how people are experiencing life via their smartphones, on the go, and photos are actually a deep component of that, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, whether they're sharing something of a blog or any piece of content. So what matters today for content marketers and for marketers in general is how do you actually leverage photos inside of all the content pieces you produce and really express your authenticity through this mechanism. So this kind of dives into the heart of what I'm going to kind of teach today, which is how to quickly spot an authentic photo. We've all been in the world of just trying to find some bit of content or some photo for a different piece that we're trying to do, and being able to quickly and efficiently understand what are the pieces of that puzzle are very, very valuable to your time and to your business being able to achieve success in growing that information. So the three components we're going to go over today are technical execution, so like essentially what makes up a good photo, a trace of humanness, and relatability of that photo. So we all know that SEO is very valuable. We all know that catchy headlines are very valuable. But today we're going to dive in deep on how to integrate photos and spot those photos for your content marketing really effectively. So let's jump into that. So the first piece is understanding just structurally as a photography issue, what makes up a good photo. The three major components are exposure, focus, and composition. I won't go too deep, but I'll kind of explain what these mean. So exposure is the amount of light that enters the camera. Focus is simply the sharp or blurriness. Composition is just where the photo is, or where the subject of the photo is in the photo itself. So bad exposure would be too dark, too much light, so too washed out. Focus would be that the photo is too blurry or not used effectively. So actually this photo we're looking at today, in the foreground you see a phone. It's actually sharp, and in the background it's blurry. So the purpose of that is to sharpen your attention on the foreground. So you can actually mix those two to make a really good focused photo. And compositionally speaking, you're trying to understand the frame of where they're at. So imagine a tic-tac-toe board, so two horizontal lines and two vertical lines. And basically at the intersections of those lines is where you want the focus of the actual composition of the subject matter. We've all seen a lot of photos that actually nail these components. On the right here, you're seeing a man drinking coffee outside, and this photo actually nails a lot of those technical components. So exposure-wise, it looks good, pretty good focus in the foreground, and compositionally, that's rule of thirds approved. But the reality is we do not want to obsess over the quality of the photo itself. You want to take that into consideration, but it's not the most important consideration. What's most important, especially for us as marketers, is actually telling a very human and very emotional story inside of the photos that we use. Just because it nails those technical pieces doesn't mean it's effective. So we're going to jump into sort of what makes the difference here in this humanity piece of the puzzle. So on the left is the photo we just looked at. On the right is a new photo of a man sitting and drinking a cup of coffee at a coffee shop. Now, gut and instinctually, you just know that one of these photos actually appeals to your emotions a lot better than the other photo. In this case, the photo on the right actually does that much better by expressing a bit of humanity. It almost, it looks like somebody who'd be sitting in the coffee shop next to you. So let's actually take a look in a little bit more depth in this photo. So technically speaking, this photo isn't necessarily very good. It's technically imperfect. The exposure, it's overexposed in the face. It's a little too soft. The composition is a bit off. You can't quite fit in the frame appropriately in the right spots. But emotionally, this photo feels very authentic. It looks like a friend that you would see at a coffee shop looking around and having a cup of coffee there. So you can kind of understand this notion of inauthenticity that comes from the technical components only, whereas even if a photo is technically imperfect, it can express a deep emotion and tell a really human story for somebody who's trying to use this as a background photo for a different content piece or on social, these kind of things. So we're going to do a little side-by-side comparison here and actually look at this together. So we have photo A, photo B, and photo C. In A, you just see a very standard photo. Obviously, it looks delicious. I want to eat it. B is that same cookie with a hand in it. And C is that cookie with a bite taken out of it. And so the question that I kind of have is sort of what tells the most human story here? And the reality is that photo C actually is expressing a much more human connected story than even photo B. So realize that photos that connect to your customer's life will always win. Let's talk about why this is the case. So yes, a human tells a more human story, right? Which is why B is better than A. But it's not really telling much of a story besides a hand on a plate. Maybe it's picking it up, maybe it's somebody else picking it up, but it doesn't really relate to something that's deeply emotional. And let's look at C for a second. So on photo C, someone just took a bite out of that cookie, and you actually are seeing bits of the crumbles of that piece, and we can all relate to that taste, right? So like you're adding a new level of sensory to this photo, and you're understanding the taste of those chocolate chips as you would either eat it, or maybe a friend came over and took a bite out of your cookie. I mean, that's the essence of photography, right? Can you tell a story? Can you tell a deeply human and emotional story with that photograph? And I think C in this case is going to win because you can tell a better story with it. So a lot of people understand that emotional human side of it, right? Like we kind of get that you want to tell more of a human story. We don't like the typical stock photos that are out there in this world. But what a lot of people don't quite understand, and I think is a little bit towards the deeper side, is relevancy and relatability. So you want to make sure that the photos that you're using are relevant to the audience that you're trying to attract, or else you'll fail in doing effective marketing across the board on digital. So let's dive a little deep in terms of what I mean by relevance here. So we're very used to this in the content marketing world. We're constantly obsessed with persona building and figuring out these different pieces of the puzzle. So take that learning on those things like who is my audience, where do they live, what products do they use, what weather they're using, and what weather's like there, and actually imagine that world and really understand that the photography you use should reflect that, just like the content that you're creating should reflect value added to their life. So really understand the nuances of the consumer's media consumption, their habits, their behaviors, and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis so you can fit into their life. And that's where you're going to really hit the sweet spot of relevancy. A failure. So let's pretend I'm a hotel company and this guy is my ad, and I'm basically saying, come out to our hotel in our city, right? I'm trying to target millennials in this situation. If I'm trying to target millennials, I would fail with this advertisement. And let's understand what truly failure is about this photograph, right? So first of all, I'm targeting millennials, right? So under age 30, this guy's clearly at least 50 years old or older, so he wouldn't actually relate to the exact persona that I'm trying to actually reach in those situations. Let's go a little even deeper here. So you can see, technically speaking, the photo's okay. From a human perspective, he's looking right at the camera and waving. I mean, this is clearly a inauthentic, just very unhuman. It doesn't tell much of an emotional story here, right? But so it'd fail on that component. Well, let's talk about why it would fail even farther on the relatability scale. The reality is millennials aren't riding in taxis. They're calling Lyft, they're calling Uber on their smartphones. They're literally sitting in their car, Snapchatting about what they just saw and posting on Instagram and on their way to an Airbnb, right? Like this is the millennial generation. And so most millennials are not used to going places in taxis these days, especially in urban environments, right? So the other piece of this is, especially if you want to relate to somebody locally, like geographically, the background is just kind of a generic cityscape, right? But let's say you're in San Francisco or you're in New York and you want to relate to individuals who are putting up content that really surfaces relevancy to geography. Use landmarks that they actually are aware of and that they're used to seeing, right? So generally speaking, be as relevant audience that you're trying to reach. So remember that your audience is increasingly addicted to smartphones. They're constantly consuming millions of feeds. They're scrolling, they're moving, they zoom through all the commercials on TV. They are just basically overwhelmed in a world of people trying to advertise to them. So you need to remember that they're used to consuming user-generated content on social media, and that's the place that you're going to be able to reach them with more and more people transitioning over to their time spent there. So the key takeaways in this situation is use real-world photos in your marketing campaigns. Two quick tips here. So one quick tip, like today, I want some of you to go into your office and actually try to take a photo that reflects those three components, right? Technically good execution, tell a human story, and find that relatableness of somebody in your office. Just turn to somebody in your office next to you, try to take a good photo if you can, and see if you can relate it to some piece of content or some piece of social marketing that you're doing today. So that's one challenge to you, and then the other challenge would be actually start licensing authentic user-generated content from real-world photographers and really try to find those photos that nail those three components. Again, to remind you guys the key takeaways of today's conversation from me is make sure to use authentic photos that are technically good, have a trace of humanness in them, so that a human story, and make sure that they're very relatable. With that, I'll leave you to have Liz take over the next piece of this.
Thanks, Micah. So for those of you on the call who are unfamiliar with NewsCred, I just want to give a quick 30-second overview of who we are and what we do. So we are an end-to-end content marketing solution. So within that, first we provide the content, so licensed, original, and user-generated content to power your content marketing. The second is the software to curate, distribute, measure, and optimize your content. And finally, the strategy to consult and advise you on your content marketing to ensure you're meeting your program goals and objectives. And so I am a strategist on our strategy team. And the way that we typically engage with clients and prospects is through full-day workshops, during which we really dissect and analyze every aspect of your content marketing. And within those workshops, I would say about 90% of our clients, we recommend revisiting their image curation. And the reason that so many marketers have a challenge with this is because finding authentic photography is difficult, even if you know what you're really looking for. The first reason, the web is filled with terrible stock photos. Anytime that you search for anything, pretty much, the first page of results are going to be the really staged stock photos. The second is that finding authentic photography is really time consuming. It takes a little bit more time, a little more careful thought. And then finally, it's really tough to think outside the box. And we're going to go through some tips to help you do that. But it's difficult to get yourself out of that stock photo mindset and think of other ways to relate, to convey the emotion that you're trying to provide. So first I want to go through some typical examples that for a lot of terms that typical marketers look for. So the first would be technology. So let's say that you're writing an article about big data or Internet of Things or something like that. So when you search technology, the typical stock photo choice is something like these three. So you have these futuristic hands like doing some sort of wizard action with technology. You have apps emerging from your devices and surrounding them and floating through the air. Or you have this glowing earth with these light streams coming out of it. So some authentic options to choose instead. Vintage technology. This is actually one of my favorite things to do, is just kind of go in the reverse direction and highlight kind of how far we've come in technology. Abstract. A lot of times what you're writing about in technology is kind of an abstract idea. So that's a really good case, and you can use something that is abstract and you're not quite sure what it's supposed to represent. And then the third option is technology close-up. Technology is a very complicated thing, and when you're doing kind of like showing the guts of everything that goes into technology, I think that really represents how complicated it is and represents that point really well. The next term that people tend to look for is success. So these are some typical stock photo choices for that. You have the businessman holding up a trophy, person rejoicing on top of a mountain, and then puzzles. Puzzles seem to be very popular in putting the pieces together to find success. So some authentic options, a top-down bird's eye view. When you think about how you feel when you are successful, you think like you're really on top of the world, you're really high. So that kind of point of view represents like the feeling that you get when you have achieved success. The second option is to go the satire route. So I think we as marketers sometimes need to be reminded to not take ourselves so seriously all the time. And so incorporating humor in your photography is a really great option to go when appropriate. And the third is amazement and awe. So, so this little boy, for example, he's pointing up at how high the water is going in this fountain. So, any sort of reaction or authentic emotion is a really great option for success. Another word is challenge. So these are some stock photo choices. You have a person in front of a very complicated computer-generated maze. Rock climbing is another big anecdote for challenges, and then also construction signs. And some more authentic options. Think about things that are in real life difficult to get by. So tough surfaces and barricades. So this pile of bricks represents a block between you and wherever you're trying to go. Challenges are also can be kind of scary. So doing something like a narrow pathway, this dark tunnel, that can represent that really well. And also stark landscapes. So think of an environment that's really difficult to be in. So you have this desert here with this plant that kind of looks like it's dead. That's something that really represents challenge well. Another career, so any sort of corporate-esque type photo. So always the thumbs up employee, and I had to crop this out to fit, but the blurry people behind her are all cheering. Then we have the typical arms crossed in power suits here, smiling. And then multiple people surrounding one computer, always collaborating that way. More authentic options, so flat lay of office supplies. Flat lay is a very trendy photography style, so this is very in vogue. Perspectives from an office. I think a lot of times we always think of what's going on inside the office and don't really focus on what's outside of it or kind of the surroundings of the office. So that's a unique perspective to highlight. And then also real life collaboration. So I think everyone has gone through at some point this post-it note exercise, and you can see that these people don't look staged. They look like they're actually doing this together. The post-it notes are all kind of jumbled, and it's very real life. And then I wanted to do an industry example. So health is one that we find a lot of challenge with. So for medical angle, you always have like the doctor with the stethoscope or another, a doctor with their arms crossed or something like that. A health nut holding a dumbbell and some vegetables, or also yoga on the beach, like a silhouette of someone doing some crazy yoga pose. But some more authentic options. So if you are needing to go the medical route, X-rays are just very cool images that are kind of amazing that we can have. So actually GE Reports does some really amazing imagery with their X-ray technology. Crops of a person exercising or some sort of unique perspective with crops is an interesting way to kind of highlight the same old. And then also remedies. So when you're sick, you want to sleep or you want to have chicken noodle soup, or kind of highlighting those aspects of everything that we know that we do when we are feeling sick. So it's easy to look at these examples and say like these are the better options for all of this, but searching for authentic photos is a whole other story. So these are 3 tips that we use at NewsCred to help us find more authentic photos. So number 1, using photography terms, thinking of the emotion you're trying to invoke, and being really specific in your search for what you're trying to find. So the first tip is using real photography terms. So I have a list here, but the list goes on and on. And the idea behind this is that people who are labeling their photographs with these photography terms probably know what they're doing and probably have much higher quality photos than those that will be in stock. So just some examples of these. So this is an image of flat lay brunch. This is an image of a low angle view of wave. This is silhouette of city skyline. And this is long exposure Port Melbourne, just to give you a different idea of these different photography styles and what would result. The second tip is to really think of the emotion that you're trying to evoke when you're searching for your images. So these are some sample headlines. So this is an article I wrote, 7 essential roles for a successful content marketing strategy. So the idea behind this article and what I really was trying to convey was, read this article and like all your problems will be solved. Like this is the answer. Everything will be better for your content marketing if you read this. So the typical stock photo choice is something like this, is those team building exercises that everyone did at camp in middle school. But actually looking at this photo, it doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. It makes me feel like I'm going to fall in this white abyss kind of thing. So a better choice would be something like this. So this is a great photo for 3 different reasons. So number one, the blue. The color, blue is a calming color, and it just immediately when you see it, you kind of get that feeling. Two, the blue, the ripples, the texture, that is something that, versus a blank white background that gives it the photo a little more interesting touch. And the third reason is that this show really is demonstrating teamwork and synchronicity, and it doesn't overplay the teamwork aspect. You can just clearly tell that if these people are going to successfully row this boat together, they need to be in sync and working together properly. The second sample headline, 7 content marketing mistakes and how to avoid them. So with this article, you see mistakes, you see avoid, it's kind of be cautious, read this, or everything's going to fail kind of thing. So you're really wanting to invoke that, the oh no, want to take action, that kind of thing. So the typical stock photo choice for something like this would be an eraser erasing a mistake. It's very clever. But a more authentic option would be something like this. So one, the color. Again, red, everyone knows red stop signs, and it kind of triggers this alert inside of you. And the second thing, the second thing, the spilled milk or spilling anything is a common mistake that you can relate to. It's something that kind of occurs in everyday life that relates to the title, but it's not specifically tied to content marketing. So it's kind of the play on the words there. And the third reason, it's just an interesting photo. It's a cool still life of capturing all this spill like floating around. So that's a much better option than before. So the third tip for searching for authentic photos is being really specific in what you're looking for. So for example, let's say you need food images. So instead of searching for soup and getting this, Campbell's soup looking broth, try searching for something like clam chowder. So you get this super delicious sourdough bowl and very creamy soup, and it looks very authentic. You can tell that someone just ordered this. It's on the tray, things like that. Another example, let's say you need hairstyle images. So instead of searching for hairstyle and getting this like futuristic, crazy updo, try for the specific hairstyle that you want. So like fishtail braid, it's very trendy right now, and you'll return something like this. So finally, we want to go into some case studies and take a look at some brands who are doing authentic photography really well. So mom.me, and Micah, feel free to chime in on this if you have anything else to add, but so mom.me is a mommy blogger and lifestyle blog that's using 2020 images. And their photo team, their photo editing team replaced their traditional photo sources with user-generated content, and they've seen massive engagement rates with their content. So like some of the things that I really like about their image selection, so like this mom friend first date, will we hit it off? Like rather than choosing the cheesy stock photo of 2 women sitting on a park bench holding their babies, they're showing another thing that really symbolizes friendship. Another one here, the dad's role shifting through outdated views remain. As you can just tell, like it's a very sweet moment between the daughter and her dad, and it just represents that really, really well. And then finally, so one parenting lesson I learned over time, you see this mom, she's looking endearingly over to her baby, and then also on the right here we have how moms get their news depending on their age, and this looks like a young woman looking on the internet, likely getting her news.
Liz, I'll jump in here for 1 second. So yeah, Mom.me, as Liz mentioned, is basically shifted over their efforts in buying photos in 2020. And one thing that they do really, really well that I'd love to point out is they take what is a very authentic photo and a very natural looking photo and match it really well to the headlines. So we all know how important headlines are to drive shares, to make sure that people are actually clicking through and getting that engagement you want. But really tying together that story in a very cohesive way actually takes a lot of time and energy to build a really beautiful and authentic photo matched with a catchy headline. So they do a lot of experimentation. They play around and they look for collections of photos, put together a whole array of like 20, 30 photos that might be good for that headline that they want to decide to use, and then we'll kind of match that together. So definitely a really good example of a brand who's doing this well.
Another great brand that's using really authentic photography is Bloomberg for Enterprise. And this is a very different use case, very B2B. And the reason that this is such an interesting use case is because their headlines and the topics that they're talking about are so complicated and just not easy to find images that complement it, but they do such a good job. So here in this image, they really play off the don't hit the panic button. You can see they have this dashboard really close up. You can see it's really dirty and seeing all the different texture that's in there. So it's really bringing that headline to life. Here's another example. The title is How to Structure an Outsource IT Project for Less Risk, More Leverage. So you see here, this looks like a container yard showing a lot of process, a lot of structure. And it is kind of an abstract image, but it just complements the title so well and really, really accentuates that. Oops. This is the last image for them. Banks face basal push to prepare for higher interest rates. So for this, I think that they're playing off the prepare and risk in an environment that's kind of scary and dangerous. So kind of pairing that, seems like just a very opposite choice, but they work together so well. And the last example is First Round Capital. And I think what they do really well is playing off that aspect of thinking of the emotion that you're trying to evoke. So here's an example. So Director of Product Marketing navigates paradox of choice. So they're bringing in this example of, what's another situation that makes you feel super overwhelmed and you have a ton of choices for? Shopping for paint colors. Countless number of times when I was a kid going to the paint store with my mom and choosing different shades of beige. So, something like this and relating to a real life experience that can really bring that article to life. Another thing I think that they do really well is with portraits. So they do a lot of spotlights on co-founders of companies, but I just love how they always have them in really unique settings that really reflect that person's personality and the kind of business that they're talking about. So these are much better options than the business suit with crossed arms and smiling. Another great image. So what the seed funding boom means for raising a Series A. Two things here, obviously like seed funding, you're growing your company, so they're playing off that with the plants, but also they're indicating that it's something not good with the dented cans here. So just like a really awesome image choice. And actually the way that they curate their images is hiring photography students. So really bringing in experts who know photography well and are really passionate about it. And if you take a look at their blog, it just makes the world of difference. Last example, so here's why founders should care about happiness. You have this woman, you can see in her eyes that she's genuinely smiling, and it feels like this is the perspective you'd have if you were sitting across from her at a coffee shop. Such a better choice than someone jumping on a beach with shouting for joy. And then I love this other image with this little boy in the cannon. And this is a great example of you can play around with imagery and have fun with it and incorporate humor while still maintaining quality and having like a really cool photo. So if you want to learn more, NewsCred in 2020 actually recently put together a white paper that you can find in our academy. And also NewsCred Strategy Services, we can help advise you on your image curation. Micah, do you want to add anything else?
No, not too much. Just that NewsCred in 2020 are basically integrating as well, so you'll be able to see some of the authentic photos inside of NewsCred these days.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Liz and Micah. That was fantastic. So I think we'll open up to some questions. One question that is popping up regularly is, will we be able to get a copy of this after the webinar? And you absolutely will be. We will be sending out a follow-up email to everybody who attended, and you'll be able to get a copy of it and a copy of the recording as well. So don't worry about that. There is one question that seems to be popping up a few times, which is on trends in photography. Is there anything in particular is there any way of staying up to date on what is in the latest trends, or is there anything in particular that is trending in 2015 that you could speak to?
I can take that. So a lot of common trends that we're seeing. So I think I mentioned it earlier, the flat light image. I think it's very popular on Instagram. Lots of bloggers are doing it. Another one is monochromatic. We also see a lot of representation of different types of people. So you don't just have like the typical stock photo model anymore. You have people in a variety of settings, in a variety of activities, and just kind of showcasing diversity that way. Um, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Those are my favorites at least.
We have a question here actually that's an interesting one. And it's on topics that are particularly fact-based or dry. In this case, it was about a company who writes on mergers and acquisitions, where they tend to use images of just the buildings of the businesses that they're writing about. If you're writing on a particularly sort of, I won't say dry, but fact-based topic, is there anything you would advise on how to sort of insert emotion into something like that?
Hmm. Micah, do you want to take this or I
Sure,
can?
yeah, I'll take this one. Maybe you can add something right after. But yeah, I mean, basically, it's a very typical question that we actually get a lot, which is a lot of B2B content marketers are looking to basically take very dry topic matters and understand how to kind of surround that with the same pieces of the puzzle. So the key to remember, and yes, you need to be very professional in a lot of these circumstances, but you need to remember that everybody who's reading anything on the other side of it is actually another human being. So the same things that we find funny, interesting, thought-provoking, those same emotional, impactful photos will be good for both consumer-facing and business-facing content marketing efforts. And like Liz showed in her presentation, there are times where the kid in the Canon, you can add a little bit of humor to a very serious situation, which is scaling a startup. In this case, when you're talking about mergers and acquisitions of different businesses, showing the buildings doesn't really tell a story of companies merging together or a company being bought. But there are very interesting ways to tell an emotional story behind that, and play around with those emotional appeals. So take the concepts of those, and you can actually find metaphors for that very easily, and you just got to be creative about that. That's mostly what I would say.
Great. There's a few questions coming up about social in particular, about struggling to fit images onto social. Do any particular guidelines on how to use images when you're dealing with social media?
I mean, yeah, I think it just depends on the channel that you're publishing on. So, for example, like on Twitter, landscape images look a lot better than portraits. And then also if you're, overlaying text or something on that, right align doesn't work as well. It's better to have that text in the center or align to the right.
Do you have any advice on nonprofits, for example? An example here was, using images for causes without using exposing photos and sort of things that may be controversial. Anything to do with sort of like political or nonprofit or anything in that category?
Micah, do you have any tips for that or?
I'm trying to think about that. So nonprofits and political. So basically the essence of that question is, how do you avoid, I guess, using controversial photos?
I would say, yeah, that seems to be, and controversy seems to be kind of a thing that's come up a couple of times in the questions, actually.
Well, I think partly you'd want to make sure that any photo that you do use is actually very legally, that you buy legally. So in a lot of situations, if you use a different kind of way, let's say, for example, you're doing a cause that's very controversial, and you essentially take a photo from somebody and there's a person in it, if they haven't followed the legal standards to get a model release or that thing's required, you could potentially face issues where you're putting a person in a position of supporting a political cause or controversy. They might be a little bit uncomfortable for that individual, and then they'll have some legal pursuits from there. So you want to make sure, one, that you license photos from places like 2020 or any other stock photo site that has legal requirements for that content. And then I would also say that, essentially you're delving into issues where you have a stance. So take that stance and find photos, again, that reflect your position, right? Or if you're taking a political stance, do that. So I don't know. I wouldn't shy away from photos just because of their political correctness. I think that any organization just needs to reflect their brand's identity. And a lot of political causes and NGOs do take a stance on certain issues. And I would say that it's good to be bold. And part of honesty and integrity that we kind of discussed in the very beginning, it's important to businesses, is actually taking those stances that you believe in and standing behind them. So for political organizations and NGOs, I do think that's very important. Licensable content as well.
Do you have any tips or guidelines on how to learn more about legal standing on images and any sort of legal like does it depending on industry or anything that might be sort of like a useful guideline on how to know sort of what to avoid and what to sort of like look for and how to research that?
Yeah, there are some useful tips online. Basically, we're an organization at 2020 where we actually care deeply about all these different matters and are trying to take user-generated content and make sure they're legally acceptable. So we've actually built into our terms very clear and easy to read FAQs on legal issues involved. So for example, some basic standards is that most stock photo sites will not allow you to use photography for defamatory or sort of like pornographic use cases. And so you can kind of understand the nature of the terms, and where it gets a little bit complicated is medical and cigarettes and some of these different kind of borderline concepts where certain services will not allow you to use those. So it's on a case-by-case basis, and I think you need to just make sure you reach out to any organization that you license photos from, and that's probably the best way to start, is to reach out to them or read their terms of service. But there are some different guides out there in terms of infographics and blog guides that talk a little bit about that, and we can try to send some of those out after this webinar if that's helpful.
Great. Do you have any advice on things to specifically avoid in cases like color? Are there any colors that perform less well than other ones or even negatively compared to sort of like default images?
I can take this, Liz, or unless you wanted to grab that question.
Nope, go for it.
So we've actually been running a lot of experiments, especially on Twitter as we're putting content and different advertising there. And we run tons of A/B experiments, and I also suggest everybody should do this, is be experiment driven. Think about A/B testing your content, thinking about ways to kind of do quick experiments, learning what works. We have found, generally speaking, that the photos that will tend to catch people's attention on social media and when they're trying to find these pieces of content is bright images with people in them tend to perform a lot better. For sure, we found that authentic photos perform better as well. We also found that just generally speaking, using colors that really pop. So if you go back to the photo that Liz was going over with the spilled milk on the couch, that beautiful red in the background, when you're just think about the ADD nature of everyone scrolling through feeds and scrolling through their life. When you can find a photo that really just pops in color, you'll be able to catch their attention. And then when you have that bit of humanity behind the individuals inside of the photo, you'll be able to drive that engagement and that true brand identity you're trying to express and get them to kind of click through and engage with your pieces of content. So that's the stuff that we've found. It's like a pretty simple, easy one that definitely you can put into action very quickly.
Excellent. There seem to be a few questions coming in that are a little bit on the specific side. So what we can do is we can follow up with anyone who's kind of got a very industry specific term or something like that. We can follow up afterwards. I'm just going to check through, see if we have anything in here. So I have a question here actually for 2020. How does 2020 work with clients who want photo ideas after a subject and emotion is defined? I suppose, do you want to speak to sort of like workflow with clients and how that would actually work in starting up with you?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. So at 2020, we actually are a community of photographers that are engaging via mobile app, and we actually have 2 or 3 ways that we do this. So the first way is we actually have challenges. So if you're a brand that's looking to do a challenge and basically say, look, this is the type of photo that we kind of want. We want something that expresses this emotion. You'll actually put out a quote-unquote request or challenge to our community, and then they'll get notifications and start submitting their photos they think are relevant to you. you'll get thousands of photos essentially on demand within the first couple of days, and be able to kind of express. And then the community uploads their favorites, so you'll only have to sort through the top 200, 300, and you'll get thousands of photos submitted. So that's one way that we actually connect you directly to real world photographers who are out there taking photos. The other thing too is that with our full service package, we actually will work directly with clients, and we'll put a photo editor with them to actually get them a curated collection of exactly sort of what they're looking for. So trying to take it sort of out of the hands of you and kind of save you time, so that you can just get a 50 to 100 photos that are really relevant to you. And so essentially a very personal handheld version of being able to search through stock photos and find those emotional photos that you're trying to look for. So these are a couple of the things that we work with clients on to make sure that they're getting the photos that they want as quickly as possible. And as soon as we've actually found that as we kind of do this process, that people actually learn very quickly how to use 2020, how to find the photos that they want, and they actually will develop their own insights and become just as good as the photo editors at spotting the photos that they want. So hence part of us doing this webinar is teaching people how to actually spot the photos that are going to be really valuable for their industry. So those are the different ways that we work together. And so all you got to do is just reach out to us, and we'll start that conversation if you want to find out more about that.
Excellent, thank you. I think we might be running towards the end now, so I just want to say thank you to Liz and Micah for joining us, and thank you for everybody who attended the webinar. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to follow up. We will send out follow-up emails afterwards with all the contact information, but thank you for attending.